Hello, welcome to another video. And this one is going to be targeted more towards Christians because it is talking about faith. And the reason I decided to make this video is because ever since I was a Christian, which has basically been my whole life, I've always been a bit confused by the term faith because it seems like it means a whole lot of different things at the same time and people use it in so many different ways. So in this video I'm going to be talking about how faith is used, what I think faith is, what I think faith is not, and then a potential impact at the end of this video. So let's begin. How is the term faith used by Christians? Well, I see four main ways in which the term is used. One of these is towards struggling Christians. For example, there might be a Christian in the church who is going through a lot of pain because they, let's say, lost a loved one. Now, as a kind of encouragement, another Christian might go up to them and say that they should have faith in God. And that's just a very vague and broad example, but that's generally the vibe in which it is used towards struggling Christians. They will tell them to have faith, to just have faith. And another way in which it's used is as a general term for saying Christianity. For example, they'll say, hey, we have a new member of the faith. And that'll just be saying that we have a new member of the church who has become a Christian. So it's used like that. Another way in which the term faith is used is when talking about why they believe what they believe, why they believe in Christianity. For example, a Christian might say that they believe in Christianity because of evidence, because of the logic and arguments, but also because of faith, because they have this thing called faith. And I'll talk more about what I think that means later on, but that's another way in which the term is used. And then finally, there is this interesting aspect of faith called blind faith. And a lot of Christians talk positively about blind faith, as if it's a good thing to have this thing called faith blindly, without any evidence or without thinking too hard. And I'll talk more about that later in this video as well. But those are the main ways in which the term faith is used. And based on these ways that it is used, here is what I think faith is. Now, I think there are two aspects of faith. One is trust, and the other is belief. So first, let's talk about trust. Why do I think one aspect of faith is trust? This should be non-controversial, because I think a lot of Christians would agree that a big part of faith is trust. And this specifically comes into play when Christians are talking to struggling Christians or doubting Christians, like the example I brought up earlier where a Christian has lost their loved ones and is doubting about God's love and His care and His sovereignty and His omnibenevolence. And a Christian might go up to them and say that it's important to have faith or to have trust. And I don't necessarily think that when the Christian says to have faith or to have trust, they just mean to choose to put your trust in this God you're doubting in. But I think it might more specifically mean to have trust in whatever originally brought you to Christianity. For example, if that Christian who has lost a loved one is struggling and someone tells them to have faith, to have trust, it might be beneficial to think back on whatever originally brought them to Christianity, whatever spiritual experience or revelation or argument even that brought them to Christianity, and to have trust that the power of that experience or revelation is enough to demonstrate the love of God and to carry them through their struggle or whatever they're going through. So the trust aspect of faith could just mean to put trust in God, but also to have trust in God through, specifically, whatever originally brought you to trust Him in the first place. So that's one aspect of faith. And the other aspect of faith is belief. For example, when I talked about how a lot of Christians will just refer to Christianity as their faith, as their belief. This is my belief. This is what I believe in. This is my faith. They are essentially interchangeable terms. And additionally, there is the aspect in which belief is separated from evidence for some reason, where Christians will say, I believe because of evidence and also because of faith, because there's this kind of belief that doesn't require evidence. And I'm going to talk about that right now by going on a little tangent about blind faith, which drives me absolutely insane for a couple of reasons. One, because I don't think it's truly possible to have blind faith, and two, because I think the idea of blind faith might stem from a possible misinterpretation of a biblical passage. And this passage in particular is John chapter 20, verse 29. And this verse comes into context when Jesus has allegedly just risen from the dead, and he's been revealing himself to a bunch of his disciples. But then there's one disciple, Thomas, who has not yet seen Jesus, and the disciples try to tell him that Jesus has risen from the dead, but Thomas is like, I won't believe that until I've seen him myself and have touched his wounds. So then Jesus pops up in front of Thomas and says, here I am, touch the holes in my hands and the hole in my side. And then Thomas believes because he has seen Jesus. And so then John chapter 20, verse 29 says, quote, Then Jesus told him, Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. End quote. So what it seems like Jesus is saying initially is that, yay, it's nice that Thomas now believes because he has seen Jesus physically. But it would have been better if Thomas had believed without seeing Jesus. And now let me talk about the two problems I have with blind faith. First, I don't think blind faith is possible because I don't think it's possible to believe in anything without having at least some form of evidence for that belief. Even most Christians who believe because of, let's say, a personal testimony, that personal testimony is evidence. The experience of God and of Jesus is evidence. If they have any reason to believe in God, that whatever reason is going to be evidence. So I really don't think there's a such thing as having any belief without a reason to have that belief, even if we wouldn't consider that reason to be a good reason. For example, let's say somebody has been brought up in a cult and has some sort of wonky belief, and we look at that person and say, well, the only reason you believe in that thing is because you were brought up in that belief and because you were raised in a bubble and that's the only thing you were told. And the person was like, yeah, the reason I believe it is because that's what I was told and taught. Low-key, that's a reason. That's evidence. And even if we don't think that that should be proper evidence, even if we think there is better evidence against that belief, I don't think we can deny that because I was told so is still a reason to believe in something, even if it really shouldn't be, or at least if people think it shouldn't be. So I don't really think faith is blind in a semantic way, and people might say this is trivially true, and I would say, yes, it is, and that's the point. I really don't think the term blind faith should be used at all. So that's one problem I have with the term blind faith. Another problem is because I think that biblical passage I was just talking about can be interpreted in many different ways. For example, when Jesus says, Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed, it does seem at first like Jesus is saying that blessed are those who can believe in him without seeing any evidence. And that's how a lot of Christians will interpret that. Blessed are those who believe but have not seen, and they interpret the not seen as in not having any evidence, which I think is a possible misinterpretation. I think, for example, a different contrary interpretation could just be that Jesus meant blessed are those who have believed but not seen me physically, as in Thomas could have believed based on the testimonial evidence that the other disciples gave him, but not that he should have believed based on absolutely nothing. Because if it was even possible for people to believe in stuff truly blindly without any sort of evidence at all, then we should just be able to believe in anything anyone tells us. That there's an alien on the block right over from us eating at the McDonald's or something like that. We should be able to easily believe that, even though there's no other evidence. For some reason, that just seems totally implausible to me, so I don't think the term blind faith should be used at all. Anyways, that was a big tangent on blind faith. Overall, what I think faith is in Christianity is in two parts. One is trust in God and trust in whatever originally brought you to Christianity. And two, belief, just the belief in Christianity. And that's basically it. But that's not the end of this video, because now that we've talked about what faith is, now I'm going to be talking about what faith is not. Now, what is faith not? Well, faith is not a choice. This, I think, is a bit more controversial, because a lot of Christians will tell people to choose to have faith, and I don't really think that is possible. And why? Well, one reason is because belief is a prerequisite for trust. A lot of the times when Christians will tell people to choose to have faith, they'll mean it more in the trust aspect, in choosing to trust in God. But in order to trust in something, you need to believe in it in the first place. And I have a few examples. One is, let's say somebody asks you to trust that your parents love you, but both of your parents died in a car accident like 10 years ago, so you technically don't have any parents right now. Could you trust that your parents love you when you don't have parents? That seems completely ludicrous. Another example. Let's say that somebody tells me, personally, to trust that my girlfriend remembers my birthday. I would be like, what? I'm single. I don't have a girlfriend. Thus, how can I put trust in a person that does not exist yet, hopefully? That's a great question. Another example might be someone tells me to have trust that aliens right now are looking for Earth and trying to contact Earth right now. Well, I don't know if aliens actually exist in the first place, so how can I have trust in that? And similarly, if somebody tells an atheist or agnostic to have trust or to have faith in God's love, I don't really think that's possible unless they believe that God exists in the first place, which is why that simply does not work. Unless you have the fundamental belief in God, you can't really have trust in Him. And so you can't have the trust aspect of faith without the belief part of faith. But what about that belief part of faith in particular? Well, guess what? I don't think you choose to believe in anything either, because when you believe something, I think that you are convinced of that thing's truth. And I don't think that we choose to be convinced by things. For example, this is a personal example. When I stopped believing in libertarian free will, it was because I heard a very convincing argument in favor of a lack of free will or of the impossibility of free will. And I didn't choose to be convinced by the argument, I just was. I listened to the argument and then I was like, wait a second, I think that makes sense. Free will cannot exist. And I even after that tried to look for responses to that specific argument. I listened to a lot of podcasts that tried to dissect it, and I read things on how libertarian free will should exist, but I couldn't make myself become reconvinced of the existence of libertarian free will. It just happened to be the case that the argument against free will convinced me, and I did not choose for that to happen. And I don't really think we choose any of our beliefs to be convincing either. Now, another example of how we can't really choose our beliefs might be with something like aliens, as I was talking about earlier. Now, a lot of people simply are not sure if aliens are real. And it's not like we could just choose to believe that aliens are real or that aliens don't exist. For example, me personally, I have no idea, and I could not make myself believe in one option or the other. And I would ask you, if you're also not sure if aliens really exist, to try to convince yourself if aliens are real or that aliens are not real. Can you do it? I really don't think so. And so all of this points to the idea that we cannot choose what we believe in. So, those are two reasons why faith is not a choice. One, because we cannot have the trust aspect of faith without believing in the thing in the first place, and then because we don't choose what we believe in. And now I'm going to be getting into a third point about why faith is not a choice, specifically why faith should not be a choice, that is more biblically rooted. I'm going to make an argument that more has to do with biblical interpretation that could be very controversial and that you might not like. But here it goes. Now, there is a Bible passage that all kids have to memorize usually if they went to Sunday school. That is Ephesians chapter 2, 8 through 10. And it says, quote, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." And that is the NIV version. And I was reading off of a script, even though I know I said that all kids had to memorize it. I haven't had to recite it in a very long time, so yeah, I did have to look at the script for that reading. But the important part is the very first part, where it says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, this is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." And here's the thing, if faith is a work, and we are saved through faith, then we are essentially saved through work. I'm going to try to put this in a more organized manner that I've written down. Ahem. If we are saved through faith, and if faith is a choice, and making a choice is a work or a thing that we do, then we are saved through a work, which most Christians will say should not be the case, because one of the main aspects of Christianity that a lot of people will go to describe how Christianity is different from other religions is by saying that Christianity is like the only religion that does not require us to be saved through our own doing or by works. It's all God's grace. But if choosing to believe in something is a choice that we make, it's something that we do, and then it's that belief that saves us, then we are essentially being saved because of works, because of what we do. So if we assume that libertarian free will does exist, and that faith is a choice, then we are all saved through works. And then Christianity becomes another one of those religions where it is the works that save us because we choose to believe. And also, going back to Ephesians 2, chapter 2, verses 8 through 10, that would give us something to boast about, because it's us who chose to believe in the gospel that we are saved. That is something that we did. It was our responsibility. We chose that, so that is something to credit us for, to boast about. And I don't think that is very biblical. So that is one interpretation of this passage that I actually really like, and I'm sure a lot of people probably won't like. But if you have a problem with that, feel free to comment about it or to contact me directly, because I would love to talk about it more. But those are 3 reasons why faith is not a choice and why biblical faith should not be regarded as a choice. 1, because we cannot trust in something without believing in it. 2, because we cannot choose what we believe. And 3, because choosing faith is unbiblical, as it gives us something to boast about, and it means that it is our works that save us. And now let's talk about the impact of everything I've been saying. What should you take away from this video? And if you've made it this far, you probably already know, because I have been saying, or at least giving the impression throughout this video, that I think it's ridiculous when Christians tell people to simply have faith, specifically non-believers. So that's the impact. That a common mistake Christians make is when they try to tell non-believers to simply have faith in God, because of everything I've already said in the video. That's ridiculous. If you're a Christian, please stop doing that, because you cannot choose to have faith. It drives me crazy. People have told me that on specific issues as well, and it's problematic, because I cannot simply choose to believe in things, and I cannot choose to have trust in things that I don't believe. So, please, stop. But, thanks for watching this video, if you made it this far. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, problems, concerns, things you want to fight me on, then feel free to leave it in the comments or contact me directly, talk to me, because I do love talking about these things. And that's it. Thank you. Bye.